Hello, good morning. How are you? My name is Adela Pineda Franco, and I am the LLILAS director. Please let me know if my voice gets interrupted because my connection hasn't been very good. Thank you so much. I am very happy this morning because I have the pleasure to introduce two of my beloved colleagues, Paola Canova and Gloria Gonzalez Lopez, both of them here as faculty. Paola Canova is a shared faculty at LLILAS and the Department of Anthropology, and has a degree in human ecology and German languages by the National University of Asunción, Paraguay, and is currently also an associate professor, as I said, at Anthropology and LLILAS. She has conducted research since 1998 in Paraguay among indigenous people, mainly exploring issues of gender and sexuality, indigenous state relations, urbanity, and political ecology of the region. Two recent publications include the book Frontier Intimacies, Ayoreo Women and the Sexual Economy of the Paraguayan Chaco, published by University of Texas Press, and an edited volume, Reimagining the Grand Chaco, Identities, Politics, and the Environment. Today, we are here because we are going to discuss her book, Ayoreo Women and the Sexual Economy of the Paraguayan Chaco. And my colleague, Professor Gloria Gonzalez Lopez, has agreed to comment the book after Paola's presentation. Gloria is the C.B. Smith Centennial Professor of Sociology at Austin, where she has worked since 2002, and she has numerous publications, including work on areas of sexuality, gender, Mexican American and Mexican studies, the intellectual projects that are inspired by feminist theorizing and research in social sciences, whereby sexuality is considered a social prism through which to explore institutional dynamics, the areas of religion, education, law, family, culture, and politics. We recently also presented her book, so I am very happy and thankful for you. And of course, I want to say thanks to Paloma Diaz, who is our Assistant Director of Scholarly and Public Programs. For without her, these events wouldn't happen. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Adela, and also thank you to Gloria for being here today. And I appreciate also all the work done by Paloma to organize this. So thank you. And so I will go over the book. Paloma, if you can put the slide, please. Okay, so I'll try to summarize a bit what the book is about. Mainly, I would say it's an exploration of Ayoreo indigenous intimacy and the changes that Ayoreo have undergo after contact in the 1960s with the surrounding society. So what I try to do is I focus on intimate practices of Ayoreo indigenous women in Paraguay to explore broader socioeconomic changes that are taking place in the Chaco region where they live. And in telling the story of Ayoreo women, what I wanted to do is also tell a broader story of how contemporary frontier economies are being constructed, transformed, and experienced through intimacy by different groups of people who live in the area, and also show how moral economies can be creatively transformed rather than homogeneously incorporated into a regional capitalist system. Next, please. So So I use intimacy as an analytical category that moves beyond the use of the term in its sexual and private dimension to focus also on the interconnections and blurred boundaries that link personal and subjective experiences to broader economic and political processes. The term intimate frontier is used throughout the book as a metaphor to highlight the ways in which intimacy reproduces the logics of frontier economies while also challenging its terms, unsettling cohesive frontier projects of the state, missionaries, and settlers to the region. I follow the proposal here of a group of feminist scholars such as Laura Baer and others who argue that instead of looking at capitalism as an a priori already determining structure and logic and trajectory, we should ask how its social relations are generated out of divergent life projects. So I draw from this perspective to explore how women have come to develop their own involvement with the economy according to their own logics. And rather than focusing exclusively on the impact of capitalist endeavors and how people come to terms with it, I shift the scale of analysis by also paying attention at the social forces that help reproduce the economic sphere. So these forces in today's Chaco include the strategic deployment of sexuality, the role of race in establishing a hierarchical labor force and unequal social structure, and also a pervasive historical and contemporary discourse of the region as a hyper-masculine social space. Next, please. So the research for this book has taken place mostly in the, or mainly in the Chaco region of Paraguay. The Chaco is part of what is known as the Gran Chaco, the second largest ecoregion after the Amazon. And I have been working with the Ayoreo there since 2000, also with Mennonites, and more recently with Mestizo and Brazilian migrants to the region. And the bulk of uninterrupted fieldwork that I conducted for this book took place between 2009 and 11. Next, please. Following the same logic of capital expansion in other frontier zones, by the end of the 19th century, a rhetoric of the Chaco as terra nullius enabled the conditions for a process of accumulation by dispossession. Indigenous peoples were taken out of their territories and incorporated into the regional labor force, and at the same time, extractive industries were established in the region alongside cattle ranching enterprises. Next, please. So the isolation of the region became the ideal scenario for the migration of conservative Mennonite refugees who were living at the time in Canada and Russia, and who were looking for a place where they could remain ideologically secluded. So they were invited by the Paraguayan state and came to the Chaco region in 3 ways between 1926 and 1947. And they established 3 communities, which today are the main economic hubs in the region. Next, please. I show in the book how the colonization and economic development of the region by Mennonites had the active support of the state, which allowed them to create a system of self-government. I challenge popular and scholarly discourses that attribute Mennonite success to only their hard work and faith. I argue that this obscures the social forces that support their present frontier economy. I show how the patriarchal structure of the colony, where gender regimes of labor and racialized social hierarchies constitute the main basis of the current economic system in place. And although not included in this talk, the book discusses how early policing of female Mennonite sexuality, for example, play a crucial role in help building and sustaining the boundaries of the Mennonite community in relation to the surrounding society. So this aimed at preserving Mennonite identity on the one hand, but also gave way for practices of discrimination to become rooted in the community. Next, please. So the Ayoreo are a cross-border group of about 5,600 individuals who currently live in the Paraguay and Bolivian border, and they have had a continuous presence in that region since at least the 16th century. Due to internal warfare and outsiders' invasions of their territory, they first made contact on the Bolivian side of the border in 1947, and on the Paraguayan side of the border, they were contacted by the 1960s. This was done by US-based evangelical New Thrice missionaries. Next, please. So what I do in the book is tell the stories of Curahodie. Curahodie, this is a term used by the Ayoreo to refer to young single women who monetize their sexual liaisons with non-Ayoreo men, mostly in the colonies. So they approach intimate liaisons on their own terms, they initiate courting and flirting, and they do not see their involvement the involvement of money as morally problematic, rather as constitutive of their sexual encounters. Next, please. So to fully understand the practices of Curahodie, in the book, I also trace how Ayoreo customary practices of sexuality look like. And through the stories of elder women, I show how prior to mission life, their ethics was constructed around principles of relative autonomy, public expression of desire, reciprocity, and exchange. So unmarried women explore their sexuality with limited male impositions, entering into multiple temporary relationships. And insofar as their practices did not interfere with that of married couples, they did not have a negative moral connotation. Next, please. So it was also customary for women to deploy their sexuality as a means of exchange. So sexual liaisons were reciprocated with forest goods such as honey or meat, and courting was an opportunity for men to display good hunting skills. Next, please. The missionary frontiers settled Ayoreo mission stations and quickly incorporated them into the market economy. So this created a gender hierarchy, facilitating the incorporation of men into the economy while subordinating women to the domestic realm and excluding them from the formal labor force. So added to these, colonial Mennonite discourses of Ayoreo women as dirty and uncivilized also fostered a stigma that resulted in their historical exclusion from the workforce. So up to the present, of all indigenous groups living in the region, Ayoreo women are the ones who actually don't have access to work opportunities. This also triggered a lot of gender inequalities as women became exclusively dependent on men to access cash. Next, please. So, but despite missionary inculcation of Christian values, women continue to engage their sexuality according to these customary ontological principles. So why wasn't this practice eradicated or discontinued? And I argue that missionaries shifted Ayoreo sexuality from the public to the private realm, making women practices less visible. And this allowed it to survive over time. Next, please. By the 1980s, Ayoreo were mostly dependent on the cash economy, and money permeated social relations at all levels, including the realm of sexuality. So the exchange of sex for money since then has been integral to flirting and intercourse among young contemporary youth. And these practices are not framed in terms of market transactions, rather as a display of generosity and gift giving. So customary values related to autonomy and exchange continue to characterize sexual practices of Ayoreo youth today. But importantly, these practices do not continue to be reproduced in a so-called pristine way. Rather, without disappearing, it is experienced in light of new realities and colliding ethical systems that foster at times contested feelings and perspectives. Because money is now central to sexual liaisons of Ayoreo youth, the behavior of Cura Hodie as they go to Philadelphia and hang out with non-Ayoreo men cannot be reduced to conventional notions of sex work as conceived by outsiders. Next, please. So Cura Hodie seek intimate liaisons in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is the main urban center of one of the 3 Mennonite colonies, has a population of about 20,000 individuals, Brazilian migrants, mestizo population, mostly indigenous peoples and Mennonites. So the city is structured in ways that are iconic of the social tensions between the different groups that live there. Space is owned, the town is owned by Mennonites because it sits on Mennonite property. There are separated neighborhoods for non-indigenous, for Mennonites. There's also separated churches. People attend separated churches. Plattdeutsch continues to be actively used by Mennonites. And until not long ago, they had their own police system and even a municipal system. Next, please. So the urban presence of Cura Hodie in general and practices the urban presence of Ayoreo in general. And here you see the Ayoreo until not long ago squatted in tents because they were not allowed to have an urban neighborhood. So their presence and the practices of Cura Hodie in Philadelphia are considered a major social problems for Mennonites and the mestizo community. So women bodies in the streets are seen as abject, and there is an anxious concern to remove them from Philadelphia. But this hasn't stopped young women from going to town to party and seek intimate liaisons. Next, please. So the stories of Ayoreo women reveal how they drawn their own ethics of sexuality to engage the economy in their own terms. So in doing so, they understand the value of the intimate exchange in terms of a constant process of conversion between non-capitalist and capitalist value systems. This perspective challenges the assumption that capitalist logics necessarily pervades the realm of intimacy, rather reveals how competing regimes of values are at play in intimate liaison. So the sex for money exchange is strategically deployed to garner social and economic forms of capital that are then used to negotiate racial discrimination and gender labor exclusion. Ironically, the exclusion of Ayoreo women resurfaces with even stronger force as they unsettle the established boundaries by Mennonites and also the boundaries that guide the terms of how indigenous people ought to be included into the economy of the region. Next, please. I argue that Cura Hodie engage in what sociologist Selizer refers to as relational work. That is, they match intimate relations with specific economic transactions and practices that are considered appropriate, taking a different meaning in relations with Mennonites and mestizo men. So in relations with Mennonites, for example, young women use what I term gift money, that is the money that retains its value as a commodity, but also retains the logic associated with reciprocity in the sexual encounter, and they engage in conspicuous consumption with it, which is in turn deployed, I argue, to navigate these racialized social spaces. With mestizo men, the value of the exchange for Cura Hodie does not reside necessarily or exclusively on the amount of gift money that they might receive. Rather, the value resides in feeling wanted, publicly and socially mingling, developing emotional attachments with men who are normally not accessible because of pervasive discrimination. So the non-economic logic of the exchange with these men are reframed as racialized desires. Next, please. Regardless of the fluidity of their practices and intentions, these young women they are challenging the expectations of what it means to be an indigenous woman in today's Chaco. Although their practices can be empowering, they are also exposed to violence and other abuses at the hands of non-Ayoreo men. Unwanted pregnancies, physical and emotional abuses are very common, and access to healthcare is also a major problem. While their active urban presence is geared towards finding their own space, their practices also reinforce an image of indigenous women as marginal, immoral, and unworthy of inhabiting the city's social scene, ultimately reinforcing the racialized structure that sustains the region. So as I wrote in the book, for a long time, I shared the same local stereotypes about mestizo migrant cowboys, most of whom enter these relationships with Ayoreo women, who are usually described as violent, aggressive. And so, but who are they and what drives them to the Chaco? And this question led me in 2013 to the northern Chaco. And this is where I realized that the latest ranching and soybean frontier is quietly but quickly expanding. And it is constituted as a spin-off of the economic success of the central Chaco, where Mennonites are settled. And this is yet another space being transformed into the newest cattle frontier with the active state of the support of the state. Next, please. So on estancias in the northern Chaco, the current frontier economy is sustained through pervasive historical and contemporary discourses of the region as a sexualized, masculine, and liminal social space. The experiences of ranch workers who migrate to the Chaco are hardly what the would-be young cowboys dream of when living behind economic poverty to work on estancias. Their experiences are exposed to the harsh living conditions and the liminality of their lives at these sites that reproduce the Chaco as a frontier region. Next, please. The violence, the previous, please. One more, please. The violence and transgression experienced in estancias is also reproduced in intimate relations where that cowboys enter into with Curahodie. So the social vulnerability of indigenous women allows these men to act in these liaisons with a greater sense of entitlement and privilege. And such dominance is something that these men would be unable to assert at their work sites, where they are subordinated also to abuses of employers. So their stories reveal also the ways in which manhood is being experienced amid these structural inequalities. Next, please. So as a mode of conclusion, it can be said that the monetized liaison of Curahodie resists categorizations within any fixed approach, describing their practices in terms of sex work or transactional sex, blurs the multiplicity of factors that shape and give meaning to these practices. Their activities indeed overlap with transactional sex in certain aspects. However, the Ayoreo sex for money exchange, rather than having its origin as a means of economic survival or a path to become modern, remains firmly attached to their own moral economy, which became monetized as a result of the commodification of social relations. So the introduction of money into the realm, this realm of intimacy, has not abolished customary values of sexuality, but has added a new set of practices such as conspicuous consumption, racialized notions of desire that have brought resignification of previous values and new meanings to women's practices. Next, please. As a result of the incursion into the surrounding society, Ayoreo women experience their sexuality, I say, as an intimate frontier that is continually seeking to civilize and integrate them through expected gender roles and social norms, but which is also experienced through transgressive desires, blurred boundaries, sexual excesses, and violence. What has occurred and continues to occur in the Paraguayan Chaco demonstrates the transformative power of moral economies to adapt to contemporary context. Next, please. I hope that the stories in the book, which I'm not sharing because I would love for you to read it, of the intimate experience of Ayoreo women, Mennonite women as well, mestizo cowboys, Brasiguayo migrants to the region, will show that these stories of economic success and opportunities about the region are not the only stories that the Chaco has to tell. The experiences of these women and men marked by violence and inequalities are the social forces that help sustain but simultaneously challenge the economic projects of Mennonites, private investors, and the Paraguayan state in the region. Their stories are stories about the experiences of gender and sexuality as these intersect with labor, money, race, desires, ethics, and intimacy in an ever-shifting landscape. So these experiences, while obscure or invisibilized, have contributed to making or are contributing to making the Chaco into the last frontier in Paraguay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paola. This was fascinating. So now we have Gloria, her comment.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. And how much time do I have? I have 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
5 to 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Well, we're here to celebrate the publication of a wonderful book, a book that is beautifully written. And so congratulations, Paola, for just publishing this this really beautiful, really interesting book. And so what I just wanted to say, because when I look at texts, I look at different things. I look at how it flows. So the writing is beautifully written. The writing flows nicely, and it tells a complex feminist ethnography story. That's the way I see it. It's a story. It's an ethnographic story. Is the feminist ethnographer, the feminist anthropologist, working with an incredibly complex and sophisticated communities in Paraguay. And I'm not familiar with that, not yet, with that particular part of the global South, but I think it's just so, it celebrates feminist anthropology. And I think that's an accomplishment. And it flows nicely. And I think what is just so special about the book is, the beauty of anthropology, of feminist anthropology that is lived, thought, and written from the South, from the global South. But it's just so interesting that, but then the book is published in English. And I know that you speak different languages, and Paola, but we will engage in a conversation. But I think that the book illuminates the complexities of human sexuality, and then in particular, the sex lives of women in contexts that are non-Western, but Westernized and complex expressions of inequality in context of, these borderlands exchanges, which can be incredibly, again, sophisticated, complex, but transformed by local and national economies, colonization, complex race relations, and reinvented expressions of patriarchy always in the making. I think it definitely expands on the ways sexuality has not been examined. I mean, it is always, it's interesting when someone publishes a book on sexuality, I always have the question, can we talk about sexuality without citing Foucault? And I go, oh, Paola cited Foucault. And but of course, it's okay. It's okay. It depends on how we engage with the text. And you're a critical thinker. And so it is always, we can exchange with, European texts in different ways. And I definitely celebrate the inclusion of all these publications that look at sexuality through a really, really messy and complex, sophisticated ways. You know, I think that those of us who study sexuality have discovered that it is not only, or used to be a taboo, I don't know if any longer is a taboo, but it's very complex, that your writing captures those nuances, you know, the more delicate, the delicacies of sexuality and intimacy. I think the incorporation of images also gives a special texture to your book, which is really good. And thank you for this presentation. It's really good. I feel like going there now, and I'm just thinking about, you know, how COVID has changed the lives of people, and you know, that's going to be a question for you, but because I would love to learn more from you. I want to learn from you. I'm just going to offer, I just want to share what your book is offering to me as a Mexican and feminist ethnographer. I also identify as an ethnographer. So one of the big things is a big lesson. So thank you for teaching me that intimacy in the end is a complex process that is deeply interconnected to local cultures, local socioeconomic systems, and within larger and sophisticated, deeply racist and patriarchal ideologies and practices. Intimacy, like patriarchy, is reinvented, you know, and kept coming to mind as I kept thinking that intimacy in the end is a complex public process, you know, so it's actually super interesting. And I just kept thinking about the ways in which white, middle-class, Western feminism still has important lessons to learn from the Global South. So thank you for that contribution. And then the moment of special joy for me that actually got me by surprise is the social and cultural functions of laughter. That's just so powerful. And I would love to learn more from you on that, on laughter. I thought it was fascinating. I thought it was super interesting. And it's just the richness. I think as a writer and as a thinker, your book truly celebrates, you know, the feminist contributions that our Latin American feminist colleagues, you know, are from the Global South, you know, have to offer here on campus. And I definitely celebrate your book and your presence on campus. I have a few questions, and I could go on and on, but that's just, I hope I'm doing justice, Paola, to you know, your beautifully written book. And there's lots of depth, you know. It's like you say, I'm not going to tell you the story so you can read more, but there's a lot of depth. I appreciate the depth and complexity that you offer as a stellar, you know, contribution of feminist anthropology. And I have questions, and Mexicans use the concept of conversatorio. It's just like to have this dialogue. And so I don't know if you were ready to have that, Adela, Paloma, and so you let me know, because I have questions for Paola, and I would love to learn more from you.
Thank you so much for those kind words, Gloria, and also for your you know, your thoughts on the book. I really appreciate that. I think that so a good news is actually, because as a scholar from the Global South, I want to write for the Global South as well, right? And I had to go through this process of publishing it in English, but it has, thanks to actually LLILAS, that has kindly supported me with the process of translation, financially supported me. I was able to translate the book, and now it's under review in Latin America, in a Latin American press, to be published in Spanish. And this is something that I've been waiting for, right, for a long time as well. I like that it can circulate or go back to the Global South. I wanted to mention two things. I think the reason I used Foucault is because his perspective on ethics, he's thinking about ethics as practice, as how women enact their ethics through practice, and that is where I felt where I in my text differ with Foucault is thinking about the individual, and in the Ayoreo case you have this sense of community, and these practices linked to broader ontological beings as well. So I used him partially, right? That on the one hand. Also another aspect that you mentioned, laughter. This is a trademark of Ayoreo sexuality up to the present. If you are not a single woman, you should be very careful about not laughing in public, because you might be showing sexual availability. So and young women at night when they are, you're sitting, married couples sit around the fire at the chief's house, but young people are like walking and circulating in la oscuridad, and you hear them laughing all the time. Like laughter is like one of the main sounds that you hear at night in an Ayoreo village. So I think it's interesting that you picked up on that.
Yeah. And the observation on Foucault was just, it was well intentioned. Okay, so it was not a criticism.
I know.
Yeah, so it's not a criticism or anything. It just comes from that, the more we're doing, and I know you're a very active member of a feminist community that has been working hard to decolonize feminism, so it is so that was just a reflection. So it was well intentioned. So that was, I stay away from intellectual violence and doing all of these kinds of things, but it was just a reflection. So that was, I just want to say that. Okay, so it was well intended. And would it be okay then to ask you questions? Sure. And just questions? Okay, so the first question, and I always ask this question, when we have conversations on books, is your intellectual evolution. Where were you before the project? Where are you after the project? Okay. Your intellectual evolution as a feminist.
Okay. Thank you for that question, and I think it's a very important one, and I always usually, so this is a project that grew out of my dissertation project, so it evolved considerably, and it shifted a lot, right, as well. I wanted to, as I said in the beginning, focus exclusively on conducting research with Ayoreo women, and then as the more I went back, I realized I couldn't tell a story just about them without looking at these broader processes going on. And so that shifted the scope of my work. And even through field work as well, right? Because for the dissertation, I never went into the young men that Ayoreo women engage, for example, and I hold the same stereotypes about them. I was in a way reproducing those stereotypes that local communities have of them. And I shifted that as well for the book project. And now even looking back at the project, and I think this is one of the beauties of having the opportunity to teach. And I teach a graduate seminar on ethnographic writing, and I have such wonderful and thoughtful students, and discussions with them enrich me and have enriched me in these past years so much that even looking back at the book now, I feel that, maybe I have grown in ways that now, you know how it is with as you grow intellectually, and also, the kind of the book. And this is a book that has been published in 2020. It's been a little bit of a while already, and because it was born in the pandemia, we didn't have a chance to get at it earlier, but thank you, Paloma, for making it happen finally. And so I think it's a process of personal growth, but also intellectual growth. And I don't know, I think it has been very enriching, and it has opened me to look at some processes in ways that I would not have been able before.
Thank you. Thank you for your reflection. So I was also, because you're a feminist ethnographer, if you could share with us some of the methodological challenges that you encountered. You know, that's always, you know, something that was challenging for you, and how did you deal with it? And then the big lesson behind.
Thanks also for that question. I think that to conduct research in the Chaco, which is a highly the Chaco is constructed in the Paraguayan imaginary as this highly hyper masculine space, and this is something that I explore in the book. So a woman going on her own to the Chaco is something. Why are you alone? You should be wearing a gun or with you. You know, you should. So it was a big challenge, but I was still, and this is something that the experiences of Ayoreo women really show me, that I was still in a very privileged position where I could move away or you know, to encounters or to instances of, you know, where there are potential violence, and many of which Ayoreo women can really escape, right? Those cycles of violence. And it was really hard, but I think the hardest has been because I have developed such a long-term relationship with the Ayoreo. I have always felt safe with them and in their communities and well received. It was when I started doing the field work in the estancias and going up there with the mestizo community that I felt more vulnerable, right? And it continues to me, it continues to be a challenge to be out there, you know, to people don't understand many times what we're doing as anthropologists and the meanings behind the work we do. And so, you know, I can single out one event, but it's just a very, there's a lot of discrimination towards women, and in the last years I have experienced that in a more intense way, right? As I have been exposed to communities or people that I don't know very well in estancias. And I before that, I had always been very protected by Ayoreo, so I never felt that way before. So it is, of course, very, as I said, very differently than how Ayoreo women experience it, but they are the ones who actually are taking a huge toll on the ongoing violence against them as they go out to the streets in Philadelphia and in other towns in the region.
Thank you. Good. Are we doing okay? So I have more questions. So is this okay, Paola? Is this okay?
Sí,
okay.
yeah,
Great.
yeah,
Okay. Good.
Podemos cambiar a español también, however.
Yeah, we can do. We're fine, but yeah, I don't know if our audience or if we. But I think you know this. You know, those of us who have published books. After the book is out, and then of course there's the joy and it's gratifying, etc. And then some of us don't read it again, don't want to look at it again because we're concerned, right? Or the question, you know, if I could do it all over again, what would I do differently?
That is such a nice question. I love to think about that because I think, and this is something, right? It's part of our roles or our positions in academia, the spaces we occupy in academia, and this was my first book, right? And so there was a lot of pressure on writing this book. I think I would have, if I could do it all over again, I would have been much more relaxed. I would not have, I've been a bit formal in following some of the templates, what I thought were expected templates. And then now if I were to do it again, or I would try to do it differently in a second book, you know, be more relaxed with the format, and you know, because I think what's to me personally, I want to write because I want people to know Paraguay, to know, I know it's an under visibilized country, and there are fascinating themes and topics and situations going on there that I would love that they could circulate more in the academia, in the global north. And so I really want to write to tell those stories. This is how I feel. And even though the book has many stories, I think I could some follow a bit of a format, or I was a bit of in a straitjacket with you know, some of the writing, and I would do it differently probably.
So thank you for that. So is it okay to ask you what is not in the book? What's not in the book? Anything that you did not include? And you don't have to answer, but that's always a question, you know, what is not in the book?
Well, there are things that I had to actually not include, especially there's a lot of violence and abuses going on related to the practices of young women. And there are many stories that I had to leave out just because for privacy reason, to respect the individuals involved. And so I think many of those stories had to step out of the book, right? Just to, out of respect for the privacy of the individuals that share them with me. And so there's a lot, and not only Ayoreo women, because I also try to talk about Mennonite women who also, you know, have experienced a lot of strains under a very patriarchal structure that they, just to give you an example, they have a cooperative system under which Mennonites work, and women, only men in the household are allowed to be members of the cooperative. So women, you know, there's a lot of marginalization of women among Mennonites as well. And so some stories of Mennonite women were also left behind. So there were some things about the violence of the discrimination and racism, especially towards women, that had to be left out. We cannot hear you.
You're muted.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, sorry. Yes, I'm just checking the time. I'm checking the time. How are we doing? Adela, I'm sorry if I'm...
I have a question.
Yes. Go ahead.
Paola, I have not had the chance to read the book, but after the presentation and Gloria's comments, I'm going to go and get it because I think it's fascinating for several reasons. And so my question comes from somebody who hasn't really read the book, okay? But what I found most fascinating from your presentation is the idea of how you resignify the idea of sexual intimacy in a context where increasing pressures to the advance of Western capitalism community reshaping their role, community-wise, gender-wise, racialist-wise, right? So my question has to do with the role of money beyond that conception that Ayoreo women have. You know, like you explain how, you know, this exchange is of a different kind, and they don't consider, you know, exchange money for sexual exchange a problem, right? But what happens with the money that they get? How does that circulate in the community in this new context? And would that tell us more about that other side that you just mentioned, the problem with, you know, constant exploitation of this group and the advance of other groups in the area, right? And how this gender perspective gives us a different lens to the overall context of the Chaco as a frontier space where you have groups that are subdued by others, etc. So the function of money, like these women, what do they do with the money from this exchange?
What do they, okay, with the money? Okay, thank you for the question. I heard it a bit in bits and parts, and I will try to.
I have a bad system of microphone. I need to do something.
So these women, so because of the way in which missionaries inserted men, Ayoreo men, into the economy and not women, they were excluded from the labor force. We need to understand that in the context of the Chaco, where you have many other different indigenous groups, all other women from other groups are employed in, be that in, they do household, they work as maids, they work in like la fábricas, but Ayoreo women belong to the last group that has been contacted in the region. And so there's this stigma around them of being uncivilized and being dirty, not fit enough. So they never had an instance or they never had a path to become economically included. And so this is where I think that their practices, the sex for money exchange is so fascinating, because in a way is they don't perceive it as work. None of these young women talked about the activity as work, and the money, of course, is used for, you know, sometimes buying food, but mostly conspicuous consumption. So usually, you know, and this is very important because in a context that highly discriminates against them, they were really worried about, Paola, I need to buy nice jeans, I need to have a nice cell phone so I can go out, and like I can buy, they would buy drinks, they would even, for these young men, they would even buy them clothes, so engage with them emotionally in relationships, so the money wouldn't be used. Although there's a lot of economic need among Ayoreo, the money didn't go to sustain families. It went mostly into conspicuous consumption. But what's also very ironic about the whole situation is that most of these young women would not talk about getting married to non-Ayoreo men, because the discrimination is so intense that they don't even conceive of that. Right, and so many of them, after spending a few years in Philadelphia or exploring their sexuality with non-Ayoreo men, they would go back to their villages and marry Ayoreo men. So actually, we see here, I think their practices really shed light on how this economic system gets imposed on them, excludes them, but then they find their own ways of participating, but in doing that, they are challenging the terms of what is expected of how they should be included into that system. And part of it is related to the fact that they are still very much tied to that moral economy that sees those values of autonomy, independence, of exploring with multiple partners as something positive. Something that I highlight though in the book is that there's a lot of tension regarding this. So there are a lot of, you know, a preacher, for example, a Christian preacher will tell his wife, you should tell your daughter not to go out to Philadelphia and hang out with these white men anymore because it doesn't look good on me. And the wife will tell him, yes, but this is the way that she can get a partner. So that is the path that Ayoreo know, or through which Ayoreo women can get a partner. So that there's that tension. And something else that I highlight in the book is that I don't try to include all practices of Ayoreo or fit all practices of Ayoreo women into a single category. So there are multiple ways of engaging and experimenting with non-Ayoreo men. Some can be, you know, just for a moment. Other girls can do that for months. There are a few who have been over 10 years or 15 years in the streets, and which you could talk about them in terms of sex workers, but they are a very tiny group. But what I wanted to do is show that there's a diversity in practices as well, and they don't fit one model. And this is something that I struggle a lot with the scholarly production on sex work and transactional sex, is that they seem to be, these practices seem to be defined in very bounded categories or within very bounded categories. And at the beginning, I tried to force my case study into those categories. And then I said, you know, it just doesn't do justice to the complexity of what goes on with the Ayoreo. And so that's when I reframed the project as well.
Thank you, Paola.
So is it okay to keep asking questions?
Sure.
We're good. So what's next? What's next?
Well, I have now, my next project is actually focusing, I have two projects to working around two different projects with non-indigenous communities. So now I would like to explore, as I started going out to these ranches in the northern Chaco, you also see these women working in estancias as maids, right? And you have these estancias where you have 10, 15 male employers, and you have women there and being very discriminated. And I also had some a lot of machista experiences with male workers in ranches. And so this really triggered my interest in thinking more broadly, well, how do non-indigenous women experience this hyper-masculine space in the northern Chaco, in estancias? And what about women who are actually taking roles that are usually typified as male roles, you know, like going out and herding the animals, or working on machines? And so that is an interest that I have on the one hand. And on the other hand, I also am interested in further exploring this new northern frontier in the Chaco. But I would like to use cattle as the guiding, or as the scope to think about how the northern Chaco, because there's also this discourse in Paraguay very strongly that says that the Chaco, that only in the last 10, 15 years, the northern Chaco has been opened up to development. But there's a lot of small ranchers that had actually gone to the region already in the 1960s, and we don't hear their stories. So I'm also interested in that. But I always continue my personal relationship with the Ayoreo, but I wanted to now move to exploring a bit more of the non-indigenous mestizo context, which I think there's not too much written about on the Chaco. And so
that's beautiful. So felicidades, Paola. That's congratulations. So inspirational also to see, you know, someone who's really committed to a specific population, a specific community, and then just to see how this is going to continue evolving, you know. So congratulations again. And I was just looking at the comments, and it is 12:58, and then there's comments, you know, coming from the people who have been following us. Should I read them so you can enjoy them too? Paola, I think it's beautiful. So Sergio Romero, felicidades, Paola. Juan Tinei Chirish, felicidades, profe. Canova, looking forward to reading it. Then Mercedes Alejandra Payán Ramírez, muchas felicidades, doctora Canova. Es muy inspirador escucharle hablar sobre tu trabajo. Luego, Fátima Valdivia, amo este libro, y a la profesora, muchas gracias por este increíble trabajo, y un corazoncito. Luego, Pilar Villanueva Martínez, felicidades, profe Paola, looking forward to reading it. Natalia Ochoa, bravo, en las manitas te aplauden. Luego, Carlos Ramos Charrón, tremenda contribución, Paola, felicidades. Y Daniel Friedman, felicidades, Paola.
Gracias, muy amable. Gracias por los
Y
comentarios.
hay otro de Sergio Romero también. Felicidades.
Sergio Romero, sí. Ah, ok, muy bien. Sí, sí, Sergio Romero, sí. Felicidades, Paola. Así que bueno, pues ya no sé cuánto tiempo tenemos, si la participación es de 1 hora o es de más tiempo, si vamos a invitar a personas a que pongan sus preguntas.
Es aproximadamente 1 hora y
Ok, ya.
hemos
Ok, muy bien. No, bueno, pues entonces cerramos, ¿verdad? Cerramos. No sé si Adela, a Paola, y muchas gracias por la invitación. Es un honor estar aquí con ustedes. No sé si Adela o Paola desean dar unos final remarks.
Sí,
Y empezamos a hablar en español, ¿verdad?
Sí, yo solo agradecer por la oportunidad. Para mí, como dije, es muy importante que se pueda visibilizar un poco la situación de Paraguay, la región del Chaco, la vida de los ayoreos y de otras personas, hay otros grupos. Entonces agradezco muchísimo y también el continued support of LLILAS para hacer posible este trabajo de investigación en todas sus etapas. Así que estoy muy agradecida por eso.
Paola, pues yo estoy muy agradecida por escucharte y como dije, voy a ir a leer tu libro. Creo que el Chaco es el Chapo Guzmán, ¿no? El Chaco es una región increíblemente fascinante desde su longue durée, desde la época de la colonia, cómo se ha manifestado como esta zona liminal entre varias naciones-estado, en el que se ha manifestado la historia del colonialismo en América Latina. Y creo yo que una perspectiva antropológica con esta mirada de género también cuestiona cómo responden las comunidades al impacto del capitalismo occidental. Entonces yo creo que es una contribución para muchas disciplinas, eh, la historia, la sociología, la antropología, inclusive la literatura, ¿verdad? Y creo yo que te agradecemos mucho y nos da mucho gusto que seas nuestra beloved shared faculty, Paola. Entonces esperemos que celebremos en persona algún día pronto.
Gracias, muchas gracias. Y gracias, Gloria, también.
Sí, igualmente, claro, igualmente. Y nos avisas cuando esté en español.
Sí, exacto, por supuesto. Va a ser
Sí, cuando esté para celebrarlo, luego en español y entonces lo presentamos en español, aunque terminamos hablando en español, pero está muy bien, está muy bien. Pues muchas felicidades y un honor y gracias. Gracias por la invitación, Adela y Paloma. Muchas gracias también, Paloma, por toda tu labor y por hacerlo posible. Y muchas gracias a las personas que nos acompañaron. Un abrazo.
Igualmente.
Un abrazo, Paola, Adela, Paloma. Gracias.